Have you ever wondered how many outfit changes your average well-to-do lady would have done in 1882? Well, here you can find out. Hello and welcome. I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're taking a look at a day in 1882. Women would wear a nightgown to bed. In the summertime, this could be made out of thin cotton or linen, and for wintertime, these were often made of flannels or flannelettes. Hair was typically either braided or tucked into a nightcap. While running water was still rare, women would use a bassinet to wash at least their face, if not take a full sponge bath. After washing their faces, women would use an astringent, which is essentially a toner. And lastly would come your cold cream or other face cream. Next, it's time to get dressed for breakfast. I start in my combination underwear. These are knitted combinations that became popular during the later half of the Victorian era, oftentimes referred to as a union suit. Reform dress was credited for these garments' popularity, even though reform dress itself didn't become so mainstream. And over that comes a petticoat. Corsets were oftentimes not worn yet for breakfast, though there definitely were some leisure corset options that could be worn for breakfast. Since these petticoats would be visible during breakfast, they were often made out of slightly thicker materials, though they did have tucks and lace things on the bottom, like other petticoats often did. And then, of course, not to be vulgar, come our stockings. These are typically silk or cotton or linen during the summertime and wool during the wintertime. These could be as plain or as ornate as the wearer desired. And these were, of course, held up by garters because no kind of silicone stay-up things yet existed. But natural rubber-based elastics most definitely did exist, and garters could utilize these. And lastly comes the item of many names. This could be called either a breakfast jacket, a morning jacket, a dressing gown, dressing jacket, a wrapper, a wrapping gown, or a wrapping jacket, just to name a few. These were typically either fully loose or semi-fitted like this, and they could be either full length or jacket length like this one. And again, they could be as simple or as elaborate garments as the wearer preferred. And they stayed pretty much the same throughout the Victorian era. The only real thing that you can tell what era it is specifically from is usually the sleeve shape, which typically followed the same fashionable shapes as sleeves in general. And lastly come your slippers. These could be store-bought in the Victorian era, but they were also a very popular item to make at home. This is really where you could show your needlepoint or embroidery skills. And women's magazines constantly published patterns for them. As for your hair, you would typically wear it styled in a simple style for breakfast. You could wear also a breakfast cap, but this was one of those items that kept on going in and out of fashion, especially around the 1880s. It was basically monthly that magazines would say, now you wear one, now you don't wear one. But regardless of whether you did or not, you would still style your hair. And though while in the privacy of your own room, you might read a while after breakfast in these garments, after that, you would definitely change out of them. These were not considered appropriate to spend the day in. What you would change into would largely depend on what activity you were planning on doing next. But regardless, you would now put on a corset. A corset is essentially your bra. This provides bust support and back support and also the foundation for your garments. In the Victorian era, garments were fitted extremely tight to your body, and that was only possible by the corset underneath because your body won't fluctuate during the day because that corset keeps your measurements exactly the same throughout. And also because this is an era where you would wear multiple skirts and multiple layers, so there would be a ton of waistbands on your waist. And that could get very heavy and uncomfortable if you wouldn't have the corset there to support all that weight. 1882 is the tail end of the natural form era. That does not mean that the silhouette was natural, it just means that it is a lot more natural and the curves are a lot more gentle than in previous eras and after it. So there isn't a large bustle like there was before and after. It is rather a more gentle silhouette, a more closer to the natural body. And in keeping with that artificial natural shape, the corset has both a belly curve and a hip curve, but it is not an extreme curve, and the bust is fairly low, sitting at a fairly natural looking place, not super high, not extremely low. And for the daytime, I switched to a black cotton sateen walking length or round length petticoat. And because the natural formera silhouette is very close to the body, the petticoat itself is flat in the front and there is a bit of gathering in the back, but it is very close to the body, held by different sorts of cotton tapes in the back. And though in this era dresses could also have built-in pockets, many women would opt for a separate tie-on pocket. These started appearing in the 17th and 18th centuries, but they continued all the way up until the 1890s. I personally prefer using these because you can put so many items in them and they won't affect the drape of the outer garments because it is a separate garment. And next comes my corset cover. This would help smooth out any lines from the corset that would otherwise be visible in the outer garments, and on top of that, this also provides extra sweat protection. Because outer garments were oftentimes harder to clean, and oftentimes in the Victorian era couldn't be washed at all, the undergarments were really the thing that kept your outer garments clean and kept off body oils and sweat from your garments. And that's why also underwear were so frequently made out of simple materials like cotton and linen, because that is easy to launder. And because the wet weather outside thwarted my plans of playing a game of badminton, I am putting on a house dress or a tea gown. These are casual at-home garments worn by all classes. For the lower classes, these would be more practical garments without a train, what would be practical for doing house chores and things like that, whereas upper class ladies would more wear these for like lounging and directing staff and things like that, but it was also permissible to entertain friends in them. So while you would not wear this going out to visit your friends, but if your friends would come over to your house to visit you, you might greet them in your tea gown. And because these are garments that you wouldn't ever wear outdoors, they had very commonly on them trains, and they could have extremely elaborate fine details, and they could be extremely light colors, things that would easily get dirty if you were to wear them outside. And while these could be extremely elaborate, mine is fairly simple, but this is more of a taste question rather than anything else. But it still does have a train on it. And while bold and very visible makeup wasn't really a thing in the Victorian era, women would most oftentimes still on a daily basis do basic little things like including darken their eyebrows and add a little bit of light rouge on their cheeks and lips to give it a natural flushed color. As for jewelry, glittering stones were considered inappropriate for daytime, and I'm wearing a pair of Gutaperka earrings. This is a natural rubber material that makes for extremely lightweight and very impactful jewelry. And though these kind of black items could be worn for mourning, black jewelry was also very popular just for fashion's sake. And for my neck, I chose a bog oak brooch. And while bog oak could be used for mourning jewelry, this particular item with its shamrock pattern is definitely not a mourning pattern. After a quiet morning with some embroidery, the weather finally cleared up, so after lunch I would change into my day dress and go out to meet some friends for tea. And since I'm already wearing all the correct underlayers, I don't necessarily need to change those. All I need to do is change out of my house dress and into my day dress. In this era, day dresses would most oftentimes consist of separate parts. Here I'm putting on my walking skirt, and next comes my overskirt drapery. Apparently in the US, these were most often separate pieces, while in continental Europe, these were oftentimes attached to the same waistband. There is a big benefit of having them as separate items, for then you can mix and match items and wear the same walking skirt with several different outfits and always match the skirt drapery either to the skirt or to the bodice. Whereas if the underskirt and the overskirt are attached to the same waistband, they have to always be worn together, and then that limits the amount of different kinds of bodices you can wear with them. And like the name implies, not only does this garment's shape come from the actual cut of the fabric, but also how it is draped onto the body and sewn together. And then there are usually tapes on the inside that further gather the fabric into different kinds of shapes, giving it that drapey appearance with different sorts of pleats and gathers. In 1882, bustles are sometimes worn underneath the gowns, but oftentimes not yet. But even if there is no bustle, that drapery already is giving kind of that illusion of more junk in the trunk, and hinting at the big bustles to come in the next few years. Next comes my bodice. High-necked bodices are the most common for daytime wear, though afternoon you could also wear something with a slightly lower neckline, but never showing any cleavage during the daytime. And high necklines typically had either a bit of lace or a gathered ruffle to protect that neckline from body oils. And the same is also true of sleeve cuffs. They were sewn onto a separate tape, and then that tape was basted onto the bodice so that you could easily take them off and on and launder them. This particular bodice has over 60 yards of souttage braiding on it. This was a very common way of decorating bodices, especially among the upper classes, since garments were getting cheaper and cheaper, especially with machine sewing. So this was a way that you could show that you had wealth for the countless hours of work that went into something like this. If you would want to learn more about this bodice, I have a separate video up on it. And for the neckline, I opted for a little lace cravat that is held in place with a pin. And since I'm heading out, it is time to switch my beautiful slippers for some boots. While in this era Oxfords and other shoes were also worn, boots were by far the most common item, especially for daytime wear, since they would protect your socks the best from the dust and dirt and the grime coming from those unpaved dirt roads. And since we're heading outdoors, next comes my hat that is secured in place with hat pins. These go through your hat and then through your hair and come out the other side. And when worn as a pair, it really secures your hat really well to your head and makes sure that you don't have to grab it even in the harshest of winds. It will stay put. And since it is a cool day, I am adding a mantle or a cape to it. As far as outdoor garments go, this era is probably the peak era of those garments, and there were just so many options. You could go for coats, jackets, different sorts of capes, and everything imaginable in between that. And then going outdoors, gloves were essential, not only to keep your hands warm, but they were also worn to keep your hands clean. Gloves could either match your dress in color or your outer garments in color, or they could be a contrasting color, or they could be white or tan. After a walk and some tea, it is time for a wash and to get ready for the evening. And though combination underwear had already become popular in this era, it was considered more informal, and a separate chemise and drawers were considered more proper for evening wear. And for evening wear, you would also oftentimes switch out to a more elaborate, more fancy corset, oftentimes made out of better materials, more expensive materials like silk satin, like the one I'm wearing, and these could oftentimes have a much more dramatic shape than daytime wear corsets. And though tight lacing was never really popular in the Victorian era, if one would want to be super fashionable and have a super dramatic shape and do tight lacing, it would definitely be evening wear where you would do it, most likely. And while I do not tight lace, I am definitely much tighter laced in this than I am in the daytime corset. But it is still comfortable. I can still easily eat in it because it does have that belly curve that allows your stomach to expand. And because we don't want to add bulk underneath the corset that can become uncomfortable bulges, we put the drawers on top of the corset. This also allows the chemise to be tucked in between the legs so that your bits aren't hanging out in the open drawers unless you're actually using the restroom. And next comes our stockings. For evening wear, these are most often silk and usually fairly thin. They could have some embroidery on them or even beading on them if you're wearing them with pumps, which were called slippers in the era. I'm going to be wearing evening boots, so that's why mine are plain. And for evening wear, you would oftentimes have fancier, more decorative garters as well. And next comes your petticoat, which can be again round or trained depending on your outer garments. I'm wearing the same one as I did for daytime because it is the exact right length and I haven't bothered making another one. And next comes my huge tie-on pocket because it is large enough to fit my fan and anything else I would need in the evening time. And next comes my evening gown. And yet again, like so typically in this era, the gown actually consists of separate parts. Now I'm putting on my skirt, and this is mostly embroidered silk, though there is a bit of silk taffeta that is not embroidered at the very back, at the part where it will never be visible with the outer layers. This is very typical in the era, and if the outer skirt drapery was of that shape, oftentimes they would only have an embroidered panel at the very front, or beading, or whatever the design element on that skirt is. Or if your skirt drapery was long enough, sometimes most of your skirt would actually just be a lining fabric, and it would only have a decorative hem that would match the gown, because only that would be visible. And again, the skirt shape is round, fairly close fitting, especially in the front. And next comes my separate detachable train. This is pleated onto a separate ribbon waistband so that it can be either worn with the dress or left out depending on the situation, whether or not you want a train. For instance, if you would wear this to a ball and you're planning on dancing, you wouldn't necessarily want the train. But since I'm wearing this only for a dinner and some socializing, I definitely do want the train. And next comes my bodice. This one is in the polonaise shape. That means that the bodice and the overskirt drapery are in one, and there is no waist seam. The polonaise originally became fashionable in the 1770s and came back into style for the 1870s and 1880s. Though, of course, this time holding on to that Victorian curvy hourglass silhouette rather than the more conical Georgian silhouette. And though evening gowns definitely could have all kinds of fancy buttons as closures, they oftentimes laced shut. More often than not, if you see a sleeveless gown, it will lace in the back, and if it has sleeves, it would typically lace in the front. Back lacing gowns can lace both in a crisscross or in a spiral lacing, while the front lacing gowns typically close with a crisscross lacing. Both for lace-up boots and lace-up dresses, I typically use this method where I first spiral lace one side and then spiral lace the other side, and that causes the laces to crisscross. This is oftentimes a lot faster than to switch between laces. Sleeved evening dresses like this typically had elbow-length sleeves, and in the evening time, as you can probably tell, a lot more giving necklines were appropriate than for daytime. So while Victorian daytime dress can seem quite prudish, evening dress definitely was not. And like the necklines, evening makeup could also be much more dramatic. And though you're still going for a natural look, the lash line and the lashes were often darkened for the evening. Rouge was applied a lot more liberally onto the lids, cheeks, and lips. You want to give yourself a natural, healthy flush visible in the yellow gaslight. And you'd finish off your makeup by powdering your face to give yourself that dewy, soft, silky look. These powders could also be used all over your body, and they were oftentimes scented so that you could give yourself a nice fragrance with them. For evening wear, shiny stones and pearls were the most common jewelry. And though for a dinner gloves were not always worn, for other evening activities like the opera or a ball, they would have been considered a necessity. Bracelets or wrist cuffs could be worn with or without gloves. And for evening wear boots or slippers, silk satin would have been the most common material, either embroidered like here, or beaded or left plain. And here you can see the finished look. Evening wear tended to be either light colors or dark and rich colors, things that would look good in the very yellow gaslight. While muslins, laces, tulles, and organdies and other light materials were recommended for summertime and also for young people. For older people and for winter wear, rich materials like embroidered materials, moirés, and silk satins were recommended for wintertime wear. And in this case, when I say older women, I mean somebody who's too old to be a young debutante, someone who's most likely married already. A Victorian lady's evening of entertainment could easily carry into the wee hours of the morning, but this is where I leave you, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button because it really does help out in this universe, and if you would like to and you haven't already subscribed, remember to do that so that I can see you again next time. Bye!